The music's on, the disco ball has dropped, and it's time to get this party started. You're listening to episode 13 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery After Party podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. I'm your host, Heather Barker, and with me, as always, my favorite Jeff, basically.
Jesus.
I'm trying to think of other Jeffs that I know. I was going to say my favorite Santa Gorn because that's all I can literally
I was all ready to do my Gorn impression, and you threw me for a loop.
Nope, and I don't think we should edit this either.
No, we're definitely not editing this.
So, guys, he's my favorite Jeff, my co-host Jeff.
That's sweet. You're my favorite Heather.
Aw, yay. Okay. He's also a Gorn, but y'all know that. We're trying to shake it up, and now I'm just making noise by throwing things around. For those who aren't familiar with our podcast, we're a community-based Star Trek discotheque of sorts, focusing on each episode of Star Trek Discovery as they air. Tonight, we'll be discussing episode 13, What's Past Is Prologue, and holy cow, maybe one of the best Star Trek episodes ever.
We say that each week.
Yeah.
We do.
Heather
we really
does.
Do. Well, Heather does, I guess. Almost. There have been some that I didn't love. But I think we can safely say on this show that at this point, we do feel like every episode is just getting better and better.
They are.
And they told us that would happen. At least they told us on After Trek. Where's my check, by the way, After Trek? Like, seriously.
Yeah, where's Heather's invite?
But yeah, because there's going to be some guy on next week. They're like, Star Trek super fans. Some guy I've never heard of.
Oh,
and I'm like, hello.
They obviously haven't heard of Heather Barker.
I guess not. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the future. Probably nothing. All right. Well, with us to talk about the episode, you can already hear their voices in the background. Two members of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook, which is the exclusive gateway to gain admission onto the show. Both are friends that we have not yet met, but we hope to very, very soon. They have been or are going to STLV. Our first has been to STLV. And we will see her again. Esther, how are you? I totally said it wrong. I just can't say it.
No, it's all good. It's polyester. Just think of the material. It's all good.
Oh, it's because I have always had this. It's when it's split up, my brain processes it that way. And I've always had trouble saying the name Esther. So I'm just always going to screw it up. And again, we won't edit that out because it just shows that people are normal. Like,
this is true.
This is what happens. But welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you. We've been in touch on Facebook for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're so happy to have you in the group. And I hope, if not this year, that maybe we'll see you down the road. And
that's for sure. Yeah, I don't think it'll be possible this year, unfortunately. But yeah, we're definitely coming back in the not too distant future.
Woohoo!
Yes, yay!
I know it's hard with the Canadian and U.S. currency.
It's not that bad, but it could be better.
Yeah, certainly. That other voice, by the way, is our great friend, JP. He's on Twitter. He's Twitter family for sure. Polly's getting back in the Twitter game, so she's new Twitter family. But JP, welcome to the show. We've known you for a long time now, and super
about a
excited.
year or so ever since I started this whole podcast thing on my side. So
that's it. Only a year. Time flies.
I know.
Time flies.
And I'll be at seat Q17 in the main hall if you ever want to find me at Star Trek Las Vegas.
Fancy. Well, we are excited that we will get to see you, JP, and you, Polly, sometime, maybe next year. We will keep your spirit alive there. You can send us a little picture of your face and we'll carry it around the convention.
You got
We'll make masks out of them and wear them.
Yeah, with tongue depressors, and you can just walk around.
Exactly.
Yes, it won't be the first time that's happened with people at the Star Trek convention.
I still have my George Takei one.
Me too.
Yes. All right.
Boy.
Well, obviously, we're among friends here tonight. We're going to hop into our discussion of the episode in just a moment. But first, we have some announcements to cover. As we mentioned, DiscoTrek is community focused and evolved from our desire to give fans in our convention community a way to talk about Star Trek Discovery. So, to enter your chance to join us, there's only 2 shows left. Man.
Oh my God.
We may have a surprise third after that. So
Maybe.
final 16, maybe. But in the meantime, make sure you're a member of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook. Once you do that, you'll see a new post every Tuesday with a DiscoTrek image and information on the following week's recording time. Just comment on that post to be entered, and we'll use a random generator to pick 2 winners the following Saturday. Once you've been on the podcast, you can't enter again, but there are still ways to be part of the discussion. I'm going to hand it off to Jeff, who loves to tell people how to do that.
I certainly do. So Heather will post in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group a thread that you can respond to from the current episode, and your responses to that could be read on the air here on the show, or if you feel so inclined, you can leave us a 2-minute voicemail by dialing 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. And you can leave us 2 minutes worth of audio that we can play here on the show.
Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we also... Our Patreon family just keeps growing and growing.
Oh my God, it does.
And we are always humbled and grateful when we get a new member of the Patreon family. We fund our shows by Patreon. Those help get us to conventions. They help with our birthday party that we have at STOV. They help with fees to run the website and produce all of the podcasts. We don't do any kind of advertising because we're just so blessed to have great patrons. And from what I know, we got a couple more this week, didn't we?
We absolutely did. And, like you said, we are totally flattered anytime anyone signs up with any amount. And it's amazing. So we have 2 shout outs. The first one is a member of our unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. And I hope I get his name right. Mr. Eric Profanchik. I hope I got that right. Eric, thank you so much.
Eric!
Yeah, Eric is awesome. I was messaging back and forth with him as he was trying to sign up. He was having some technical issues, but we got it all worked out. Thank you so much, Eric, for signing up to be a Patreon supporter. We love you. And I think the second one is a friend of yours, Heather?
So Mark Ambinder has been my friend for a long time, since I lived in New York, which was over 10 years ago.
Amazing.
And he is a tried and true Trekkie. He was more of a Trekkie back then than I was, because that was before I went to the Star Trek convention.
That's a long time ago.
So yeah, he has watched from afar as I went full Trekkie. And apparently I did not scare him off as a friend. So welcome, Mark. We are so grateful to have you join our patron family. And I do want to point out, Eric's last name does not have a question mark at the end, even though it sounded like it.
Sorry, Eric.
And also, the issue that he was having is that when you go to sign up and you want to pick the amount you want to donate per month, I think there was like a drop down, like you had to change it. It looked like you could only do $1 a month.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you can change that manually, and we do not care. We don't care we are grateful for whether it's $1 or $10. There's no difference. They're all just wonderful, generous donations. And it makes us really happy to know that we have the support from our friends and family. So thanks, Eric. Thanks, Mark. We're glad to have you. We hope you enjoy all of the fun, unedited versions of our podcast. I think next week we will have a solid announcement. We have another reward coming up, which is a group chat on Discovery, and we have a date set up. We just don't have all the details finalized, but that is coming, as well as more rewards. Jeff, remind me what our Patreon URL is.
So yeah, if you want to find our Patreon page, you can find it at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, or another way is to go to our website, thetricordertransmissions.com, and click on the big orange Patreon link in the upper right-hand side. And when you do that, you'll be taken to our page. And when you sign up to become a patron, you will get access instantly to our unedited episodes of Shore Leave and DiscoTrek, and soon to be some of our other shows will be joining in on that. So you'll get to hear some of our pre-show and post-show banter, as well as unedited versions of the shows themselves. And you'll often get access to those quite a while before you get access to the actual show that gets released. So we usually record these. DiscoTrek is only 1 day difference, but other shows can be up to a week or more, or 2 weeks before we actually release the shows. So, you know, it's a cool benefit, and we're working on some other Patreon rewards here in the very near future.
Yep. Shore Leave is one of those. So you get Shore Leave sometimes like a week or two before it comes out. And Shore Leave will be back soon. It will be back next month. Next month, because this is the end of January. So we have more Shore Leave coming in February as we gear up for STLV and con season in general. Okay. So now that we've talked about all that, is there anything else? Because last week I glossed right over.
There is one other thing.
Oh, see, that's why I asked.
There is one other thing. So this show will be airing on Tuesday, but the following Saturday, after the show comes out, it is the big debut of Reading Trek, our newest show on the Tricorder Transmission, starring our wonderful friends William Conlon and Marty Alley. They're going to be talking about, is it Desperate Hours is the first episode I believe they're going to be talking about?
Yes.
So they are, I've heard this episode already. They're done recording it, and Heather's going to be getting a link to it soon. It's awesome. You guys are going to love it out there. I cannot wait, and Heather we can't wait for this episode to hit live. And they're going to be doing a weekly show. God, the stamina of these guys, a weekly show, brand new podcasters. They're going to be doing a weekly show.
A book a week is hard.
Unbelievable.
You gotta work and have a life, you know.
Yeah.
I am going to pop on 2 episodes to talk about Drastic Measures, the next Star Trek Discovery novel written by Dayton Ward. And so I have got some reading to do. Although, to be fair, I read Desperate Hours in like 2 days. So I'm sure I can read this one pretty quickly, but I'm excited to get to be a guest on their show. And we're just excited in general to welcome our Star Trek family into the network, and to see them be so professional and passionate. It's exciting for them, but it's extremely exciting and rewarding for us.
Absolutely.
And if I can say, I mean, I got a Kobo reader for Christmas, and I read through like 5 books since I gotten it. So
Nice.
I don't know, the fact that when I finish a book, I don't have to wait until I get home to start another one kind of helps.
Yeah.
And the fact that you don't have to wait for shipping and stuff, I mean, it's great, and definitely helps me really personally. I know some people still live for the actual physical paper, but when you're in a pinch, I mean, ebooks are great.
Yeah,
So-
I'm a physical book girl. I had
too.
Me too.
an iPad. Like I did Kindle for a long time. I will say that very often you can get books for much cheaper and or free as ebooks, which is great. I think that actually Desperate Hours was on sale for like $1.99 or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Super cheap. I'm not sure if it's still available, but definitely jump on it. It's a lot of fun. It's great to have these Discovery books to go alongside the show. I'm going to need a lot of them once Discovery ends, because it's going to be a long wait until next season. But talking about Discovery, we've got a podcast to do. So now that we've got all that out of the way, it's time to talk about Discovery. So Black Alert, keep in mind from this point forward, there will be spoilers. There were major spoilers in this week's episode. So if you haven't watched, what are you doing? And you can't be on social media because it was probably spoiled like the night that you were on Twitter. So go watch it. If you haven't, come back and jump into the conversation. Our listeners know that this show is a general discussion about the episode, but we do have 3 segments, which are Drop the Record, which is opening remarks and reactions to the episode, Play a New Track, where we explore what we learned that's new about the Star Trek universe, and Spin It Again is our look back on standout moments, characters, and scenes from the show, just about anything you feel is worth a second glance. I am so ready to talk about this episode. I have watched it 3 times. So let's dive right in. Let's go ahead and drop the record. I happen to know that she's crazy excited to talk about it. So Polly, what did you think about this one?
Oh my gosh. I can't even get the words. I basically went from alternating between pumping my fists into the air to like punching my hubby. Like it was just, there was this amazing reaction throughout the whole episode. Like the first half, everything seems to be just like slowly building up, and then the second half, it was just like nonstop. There's a lot of moments that I'm going to talk about later on in Spin It Again, but basically the things that I've got notes all over the table here, guys. I'm gonna just let you know. Basically the things that really stuck out for me were humor. Like I don't know if you guys ever saw Escape from New York, but I felt like everybody kept saying to Lorca, I thought you were dead. Like I felt like
yeah. I preferred you when I thought you were dead.
Yeah. Oh my God. So that was really funny. I really. Oh, is everybody okay?
Yeah.
I loved that the Kobayashi Maru exists in all universes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That was, I think, the biggest punch I did to my hubby. He's fine though. He'll be okay. I loved how the episode was shot. I'll talk about this more in the next thing. It kind of went to themes for me. Like it was a lot of like light versus dark, a lot of shots that were in long dark corridors, with the camera slowly panning and just this little bit of light shining in through the darkness. And I thought for this particular episode itself, this was my favorite episode of this season so far. And like you, Heather, I think it's like one of the best Star Trek episodes, period. I thought this really kind of, it was so well written, so well acted. I think that it really kind of hammered a lot of things that you see in like Star Wars as well, like the good versus evil, the light versus the dark, and literally in a lot of those scenes, like this really dark hallway, and there's just this little bit of light. So it's just like they're stuck in this mirror universe, but there's still hope, you know, like they're gonna get back. There's something that's gonna help them. And then the other theme that I got from this was destiny versus choice.
Yeah.
So those were like the huge things that hit me overall. And literally I like needed my inhaler so many times watching it. It was insane.
I feel very much the same way. I had very physical, like I kind of wish that someone had taken a video of me watching this episode. Because I was like doing the same thing, like punching the air and pointing, and especially when they referenced the no-win scenario, I was like, oh my God. And during Saru's, acting Captain Saru's beautiful speech, by that point of the episode, I was sitting on the edge of the couch, like cross-legged, but like leaning towards the TV, but just waiting and waiting. And when he started talking and I'm listening, like my hand was over my mouth and I was just like captivated. And I was sitting there, I was like, wait, I don't know why I didn't cry, because I cry all the time, but I just was like so emotional sitting there. And then as the episode progressed, in that final half and those final moments, my biggest thing, I was waiting for like Colbert to reappear, like for real.
Yeah.
And it's been teased, and I didn't even know until today, and I think it was Captain Revo on Twitter that said this. I'm sorry if that's not who it was, but that apparently when Wilson Cruz was on After Trek, they hinted at, and then Matt Myra later confirmed that Wilson Cruz will be back in season 2. Sorry for spoilers, everybody. But
Okay.
this, the whole we've talked about Culber a lot on the show, and I don't mean to like totally segment into this and sidetrack us, but like I still like, based on what we've seen, it's still difficult to tell what's going to happen with that character and if we're going to see the character again. And I think that if we had somehow seen that character, like when they came out of the mycelial network, ding ding, I said it right. 50 points for Gryffindor. I think I would have lost it. And to be quite honest, like having anticipated it so much in this episode, like I know that if we do see him again somehow as not a figment of imagination, like I'm gonna lose it. And
well, don't forget, Heather, we have discovered a new time travel method in this episode, so you might be able to go back and get him.
Yes, but well, as long as it's not that we go back and then none of this ever happened, because that would be ridiculous, and I don't think
they've done that in Trek many times.
Well, I don't want to go
Star
there.
Trek Voyager.
Yeah. JP, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, they made a whole movie about bringing back a character from the dead, so it's not going to be that easy to bring him back. So
it's not. It can't be that easy, and no. But I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in the next 2 episodes. But I totally didn't mean to segue with my reactions to the show. So JP, how did you feel about this episode?
I mean, I loved the episode. I was ready to hate Burnham for siding with the Emperor, but then I became okay with it. I kind of somehow that show made us sympathize with Giorgio. I don't know how. Must be magic or something. But yeah, I mean, that, and there's one little point of contention. I was disappointed that Lorca was just like your typical run-of-the-mill throne usurper. I mean, he had dabs of something we might talk about later. But I mean, I really hoped that he would be a alien sympathizer rebel, trying to do, and that disappointed me a little bit. But I mean, the action was great. I mean, we got Michelle Yeoh in full Crouch and Tiger, Hidden Dragon moment. I mean, she was at, for people who complain that she wasn't at her best at the Battle of Binary Stars during that fight on the Klingon ship. I mean, look at this. I mean, you got what you wanted. You hire Michelle Yeoh for a show. You don't allow her to go unused, being shot in the back by a phaser. It's so they redeemed themselves well in that situation for
definitely
for Michelle.
I think it's interesting to talk about Giorgio and Lorca, because it's certainly something that crossed my mind. And again, we keep kind of hinting we'll talk about Lorca in more depth later on. But when we met Giorgio, so here's the thing with Giorgio. I have heard her name pronounced like 50 different ways at this point that I no longer know what the correct pronunciation is.
Yeah.
I would play it as like it's Giorgio. However, Lorca says Giorgio. It's not Giorgio because it was the opposite of Shenzhou. And like, that's how I was remembering that it was Giorgio and Shenzhou. But now everyone's saying it all different kinds of ways. So I'll probably say it 3 different ways in this podcast. However, when we met Mira Giorgio, she decimated Harlak. She destroyed a planet, and she seemed pretty sinister. And then last week, she's eating Kelpian and enjoying it. And I mean, to be fair, who knows? Maybe we would. I don't know. No, I can't. I'm not going to eat a Kelpian. It's like a human. Anyway. So I really thought, okay, I enjoyed the fact that she and Burnham wound up having a civil, respectful conversation, which I thought was interesting. But that Giorgio was definitely dark and sinister. And then when we have Mirror Lorca opposite of her, the dialogue was very specific, and that's, again, I don't really want to like dive right into it because it's something that I know we want to talk about later. But he's really putting her kind of on the side of allowing alien races to come into the Empire, basically, and he's the one that's saying they need to preserve the Terran race. So political connotation aside, we'll get to that. I just thought it was pretty interesting that in this episode, I could identify Lorca a certain way, and that made me more sympathetic towards Giorgio, in addition to the way that they have Burnham and Giorgio interact. It's definitely a play on our original relationship, even though now it's technically 4 different characters, I guess. But I definitely thought it was unique, and I know part of it, I just enjoy having that interaction between women. And there's been discussion on the fact that, like, originally a lot of people like myself felt that our Giorgio and Burnham had a familial mother-daughter type relationship, and then there were other people who didn't see that at all, but they saw it coming in the Mirror Universe. And I liked the way that kind of worked into not only just the story, but for me, making me a bit more sympathetic to Mirror Giorgio. But now, like, I don't know what's going to happen. I sure as heck did not anticipate Burnham grabbing her as she over to the
she pulled a Jillian.
Yeah, like
yes.
Talk about surprises don't see coming. We've talked about all the surprises we figured out, but this is a surprise that I did not see coming. And Giorgio is like, "What have you done to me?" Which I think is interesting. Interesting remark there. But I don't know what they're going to do with her now. So it's fascinating to me. But I don't know. Do you guys have any further thoughts about the two of those characters?
Well, I mean, judging from what we saw in the trailer for next week, I have quite a good idea of what purpose she will serve. I mean, it was interesting to see Burnham acting. Letting her emotions act, but for good this time, because last time she did that, she killed Takuma, and instead this time she the coin literally flipped. So I think it's a play on that, same kind of desperate situation, firefight, and instead of Burnham making a horrible decision, then she makes a good decision. So
yeah. That fight scene for sure was definitely reminiscent of the one with Takuma and Vogue on the sarcophagus ship with Giorgio and Burnham.
I mean, it's the whole point of the Mirror Universe, I think. In this specific case, in this specific set of episodes, I think the whole second chapter is to mirror the first chapter. Yeah. Which is an interesting concept. I find.
For sure.
I thought because you've spoken about this before in an earlier episode with the is it Lethe? Is that how you pronounce the episode name? It's that speech that she says to Tyler when she goes, "All my life the conflict inside me has been between logic and emotion, but now it's my emotions that are fighting." And it's exactly what JP said. It's like this is like totally coming to a climax, and she like how she was fighting with Takuma in the earlier episode, and then it came as a complete surprise to me when she grabbed Georgiou, but then when you think about it, when I rewatched it, I'm like, well, obviously she did that because she couldn't save her before, and she was going to save her this time. But even I can't remember the exact quote that Lorca said to her. I think when he was like transmuting this over the system, he was also commenting on Burnham's emotions kind of like getting the better of her. So it's like really like this. The whole episode was about emotions for all of us watching. But you totally, you're totally right there with Burnham, and you feel exactly what she's going through.
Yeah, she's actually, she's becoming humans, and she's learning to deal with her emotions and with her impulsions in a healthier way, I think.
So Jeff, what did you think about this one?
Wow. So I'm going to say this is probably my favorite episode of Discovery so far. Maybe the best episode of Discovery so far. It's controversial, but I mean, it pretty much has everything that you'd want in a Star Trek episode, right? Action, science, intrigue, time travel, and it feels like it doesn't even rest for a single minute. It's pretty much a nonstop onslaught, right? So I think I was a little bit shocked at how high they raised the stakes in this one. I think this is maybe the highest stakes of in Star Trek that we've seen, or maybe close to that. I mean, the fate of the entire universe rests on the actions of Discovery.
The entire universe is...
exactly, yeah, all universes. So I mean, this is pretty much, forget the Klingon War. This is pretty much everything everywhere. So I thought that was a little bit high. It was interesting that they went that far. I was a little bit surprised, and I was a little bit worried about the fact that we've strayed so far from the Klingon War storyline. But I mean, this episode didn't even have any updates on the Voq/L'Rell situation. I mean, we just kind of assume that they're still in the cell together, I guess. But at the end of the episode, we finally get some answers, and especially about how valuable Discovery was in that war, and the fact that they were out of the picture for 9 months. The tide of the war turned so much since the last time we talked about it. So interesting end of the episode, and I know we're not going to talk about the trailer for the next one. We're going to save that for next week, but I guess also I'd just throw out there, I think that leather jacket Lorca is totally the better Lorca.
Yeah. And it's a good, easy cosplay to do.
Oh, totally awesome. Well, unless you want to wear the real armor underneath, that might be trickier.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, I think I've already kind of let people know how I feel about it. This was such a good ride. I don't even know when I have been so engaged in an episode on so many levels. Like, I really loved Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, because I just thought it was a lot of fun. The party was fun, and I felt engaged with the party, and then just the way that episode was put together. This, and I know we've said before that Discovery feels very cinematic, but this episode by far, this felt like a movie.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen some comments, especially as of late, and I think it has to do with the pacing of how the story is working right now, where people are just very adamantly feeling that Discovery is for binge watching. Of course I have to say, well, but I like doing this podcast. I like watching a week and having watching it on Sunday and then having the week to talk about it. I love diving in and watching it multiple times and finding all the little Easter eggs. And it's my life rotates around this show right now.
You gotta have time to digest, it's kind of like food.
Yeah, and I don't, like I've said I don't want Discovery to be one of those shows where it's watched within a few days and then people are talking about the next show by the next weekend. However, I think that for sure, like, I will be sitting down and watching the entire season one weekend, just in one long viewing, because I certainly think it's suited for that. And I mean, we kind of knew that going in with the format, but But this episode for me just had it all. It was written by Ted Sullivan.
You said his name correctly.
Yes, I said it correctly this time. He's Carter Hall on Twitter. This is another one where earlier on in the series, I would talk about the fact that, I sit down and watch it on screen without taking notes, without looking at my phone. I just watch it as is, take the whole episode in. And then I go back and watch it again with closed captioning on, and I take notes. And when I do that, if it's an episode that I'm not quite sure about, that's when I really start to fall in love with it. And like last week's episode, I really enjoyed, but I didn't feel like it had the same quality of dialogue that the others did. Whereas this one just had so much, and especially on those themes of like destiny and destiny, fate, choice. I think it was Giorgio said to Michael, "Your choices have determined your fate." And then Michael turns around and says to Giorgio later that I'm responsible for forging my own path. We all are. And I know that's kind of basic. It's basic dialogue.
I wrote that quote down too.
At the same time, even Saru's speech, which I wrote down word for word, and I was like about to post it on Twitter. And then my great friend Aaron Harvey, he podcasts over on Trek FM, Saturday Morning Trek. He is a graphic artist, and he transcribed the quotes and made a beautiful graphic, which I will post on Twitter tonight. Or he's Geek Filter on Twitter if you want to find him. But he had written it down, and like when I went back and was writing this, I'm like, it's not like the most bravado, elegant language you've ever heard. I mean, it's really kind of basic, but like what he says is just so powerful, combined with the fact that in that scene we're seeing the bridge crew like all coming together for the first time, and everyone having a line, with the exception of Lieutenant Milton Richter, Mr. McDreamy, who has since disappeared. I guess he got killed somewhere and we didn't see it. But he was mentioned early on because they would just like show him looking all dreamy over in the corner. But no. I was really, really excited to get to see the entire bridge crew showcased together on Discovery, and then like old Shakon had a role in that she got killed in the Mirror Universe, but she was a commander on the Charon, so that was really cool. That it was just really awesome, and so that moment again was just an extremely powerful moment. And Saru's speech, it was just like such a culmination of so many things. So the writing in this, the roles that all of the characters played, I feel like I'm skipping to the end here because I'll probably just like rain my praise all over them again. But I also wanted to point out that this was directed by Olatunde Osunan. Oh, let me say that again. Olatunde Osunsami. Ooh, I said it right. And he's a Nigerian director. He's directed some other episodes of Discovery, and he really deserves a ton of credit because, back to my main point, this was an extremely cinematic episode of Discovery.
Originally, this was set to be the season finale. You got to keep that in mind. I don't know at what point they would have resolved the Mirror Universe, but it was supposed to originally be 13 episodes. We got 15. So I'm curious to see at what point did this stop being the season finale. That's something I'm sure Larry Nemeczek will be able to tell us in 5 years. But
someday, Our great friend Dr. Trek, who has a new podcast, Trek Files, Roddenberry Network. See, we plugged you, Larry. You're welcome. I don't think he listens to DiscoTrek, but we're always happy to support our friends, especially those who have been guests. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we'll find that out. I think that information would be something you'd probably find out on After Trek. And that would actually be a pretty great question to ask them on After Trek, or to maybe ask Ted Sullivan if you catch him on Twitter.
I mean, Ted said, he said that they learned it, of course, before we knew it publicly, but of course, at what point? Because I don't know. I'm a big fan of what ifs and would have beens, and but that's why I like Larry so much. It would have been.
It seems like it could have ended just as it did. And then think, okay, there's 2 more episodes. It's like, oh my God.
I'm glad they didn't let us on that cliffhanger, because they would have been, I mean, STLV would have been like a picketing line or something. I mean, it was hard enough to wait, for like a month and a half between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It was hard enough for that exact same kind of cliffhanger. So I mean, don't pull the rug under us twice in a row. So
it's interesting, like, because you bring up like the week after week. This is actually I watched Star Trek like when I was a little kid in the 70s in like syndication, the original series. And so this is the very first time I'm watching Star Trek like as it airs. I literally delved into the Star Trek universe in the summer of 2013. And the hubby and I did like 2 years straight of watching. We started with Next Generation and then went into like Deep Space Nine and did like all of the series, then rewatched all the films. So I binged everything for 2 years. So when I got into Star Trek, I really got into Star Trek. So discovering Star Trek, literally like Discovery, week by week, this is a totally new experience for me, and I'm loving it. So everything in all the other Star Trek is still so fresh in my mind. But then I've got the excitement now of going like, oh my God, I have to wait a week or like almost 2 months for a thing. So it's a wonderful feeling. And I love that I'm now like enjoying this with like everybody else. It's so great.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and move into our next segment, Play a New Track, where we talk about what we learned that's new in the Star Trek universe. JP, let's start with you this time. What do you got for us?
I mean, I'm a fan of Star Trek ships, so I was glad to learn that the Baran was a Cardinus class ship. I mean, as seen, I mean, I was able to see that from the Star Trek Egomos ships, the announcements. So thanks to them, I mean, we have the names of the class and everything. So that's nice. I mean, it's kind of nice to know that that Lorca turned into the Prime Universe the classic way. The Kirk way, the good old Iron Storm transporter combo, and again, it just we still got to wonder what happened. I mean, that's a lingering question. What happened to Prime Lorca? But I guess he would just.
That was one of the big questions from last week, right? So what happened to him? So now that we've got the confirmation that it was the classic way in the Ion Storm, we know that it, and even Stamets even says that the Ion Storm must have swapped your transporter signatures. So that implies that Prime...
either Prime Lorca died stupidly on the Baran, hitting his head on a bulkhead. Maybe. I mean, who knows?
Or they killed him on sight because they knew it wasn't him.
Or maybe, they killed him like 20 minutes later because, I don't know. Because this opens up a whole door of what was Prime Lorca being him up from and what he was doing at the time. I mean, there's a whole thing that I'm sure either David Mack or Dayton Ward or someone will cover eventually in their books, because that's what usually they like to do. But I mean, the big thing was the mycelial network generator. We finally know what the big sun is in the middle of the Charon. And I think it's probably a big allusion to either offshore drilling or stuff. When they say it's unsustainable, and they really comment on the fact that well, they ought to know that it's not sustainable, but I don't think they care. So, it makes you again some political or some at least some political allusions there on the energy crisis all across the world. So that's what texting via communicators pretty neat.
For sure. Polly, excuse me. Oh gosh, sorry. Polly, what about you?
The two. See, this is the weird one. I'm like, what did we learn that was new? It wasn't. I have more to say on the other ones, but the two that stuck out for me was the emergency transport system.
Oh yeah.
That Giorgio just kind of like all of a sudden goes, and Lorca's like, well, I didn't know we had that, and that goes right into like the humor again. But it's really interesting how it seems that everybody in the Terran Empire calls each other by their first names. Like it's just like, oh, it's nice to see you again, Paul, and like everybody's.
Yeah.
But then even when Lorca, they took down the containment field, and he says, "Hello, Pippa," and I was like, "Oh, you did not." So it was really interesting to see the way they addressed themselves in the Mirror Universe.
Yeah.
Thought it was cheeky.
Very
Cheeky. No respect for the title at all. Just like, get out of my way.
And Jeff, what about you?
What was up with Mirror Stamets and that personal cloaking device?
Yeah.
What's that about? Why does the Mirror Universe have cooler tech than the Prime Universe? I thought only the Klingons had cloaking devices.
It kind of reminded me in Unification Part 2, where they hid behind a holographic wall. I think it was more akin to that than a cloaking device, or just active cloaking.
Yeah, there you go.
Like on the planet. So
yeah.
And I love the fact that we find out that Mirror Stamets was the one that foiled Lorca's coup. That was kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
So you wonder what the heck happened. How did this whole thing fall apart? And we find out that good old Mirror Paul, who is oddly similar to his Prime counterpart, he doesn't seem nearly as evil as he should be.
Minus the spineless part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That aside. And we saw Stamets wake up, more Stamets stuff. We saw Stamets wake up in the last one, but according to Saru's captain's log, Stamets has made a full recovery. So he is back to absolute full health, which I'm glad that they said that, because you see him get back in the spore drive and start driving that thing again. I'm like, oh, didn't he just get lost in that thing? Does he really want to get back in there? I don't know. But apparently full recovery. He's good to go for another, 100 and something jumps before he...
Yeah. And this time he's deciding to take it. He's not being decided like he was last time.
Yeah. And I guess one final thing, I think we were talking about this a little bit prior to the podcast actually starting. So our Patreon folks heard a little bit about some of the preamble about the Lorca's vision for the Terran Empire and our current politics, but I kind of went a different route with that, and it really seems like Laura is almost a Takuvma of the Mirror Universe, isn't he? He's doing the same thing for the Terrans that Takuvma was trying to do for the Klingons.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I went with it. I can definitely see the parallel to the nationalism that has broken out, in several countries across the world as we record this. But I saw much more of a parallel with Takuvma and the Klingon unification than necessarily our own political climate. And what does it say about heroes and villains? Who really are the heroes and who really are the villains in either universe?
Well, victors write history, so...
Yeah. Though the victors write the books, the loser speaks the lines, right?
There's certainly, as we've alluded to, some dialogue here reflective of current political situations in our country and really across the world and in other nations. And Ted Sullivan did specify on Aftertrek that was intentional, and that they feel like, Star Trek has always been a commentary about current times, and that they felt this was a good opportunity to do that, to take advantage of that. So the dialogue between Lorca and Giorgio, I'm going to say it 3 times every time. It is very specific, and like one of the quotes, he says, just like you know that the Federation is a vocal, or that's, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. Just like you know that the Federation is a social experiment doomed to failure, childish idealism, every species, every choice, every opinion is not equal, no matter how much they want it to be. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
A scary thing to hear. And Ted actually specified that, part of it is that, yes, we're going to recognize this type of dialogue from people we may or may not oppose in the government, but also, are we able to see any of that in ourselves, where we may have thought that at some point, and then further reflect on that.
And it's great that we're still talking about that, because here in Quebec, I mean, a year ago to the day, there was a horrible shooting in a mosque, and it hurt us deeply because it shows their problem. It's not because you don't see the problem that there isn't one. And you would think Canada is one big happy place, but we still have our issues, and it's important to keep talking about those. And I'm glad that Star Trek keeps holding that flame, and shows that. I think the mirror universe was a great way to pass the messages along, because in chapter 1 you had the Klingon showing that same message, and then you got the repeat, but from the Terran part, so in a less hidden way. So I'm just glad we keep tackling the subject, and I hope they don't stop.
I agree with you, and I think we've talked about this on a lot of previous episodes we love the social commentary in Star Trek, and I would love to ask Ted this question myself, and I think this is probably a topic not necessarily for this episode, but since he specifically called this out as a reference to our current political times, what would Star Trek Discovery have been if a different candidate had won the U.S. election? What would we be watching right now? I have no idea. So I don't think we necessarily need to talk about that now. But just an interesting question, since he brought that specifically up on Aftercheck. And I killed the conversation.
I don't know how to follow that up.
Tough act to follow.
Did we have anything else to say surrounding the Lorca and the political connotation of what he said?
I had one question. I don't know, because his point of contention with Georgiou, I mean, was he just, mad that she brought aliens as slaves, or because she didn't seem to be the type to welcome aliens as free members of their society? So
it seemed, if you listen to what he says, I mean, it's kind of almost not necessarily glossed over, but it's only mentioned very briefly. But he makes the assertion that she allows other races to, flourish kind of in their space and doesn't immediately eradicate them. It's almost like she's allowing a taint to spread and not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
In his vision.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I see that happen. And well, that's interesting. And that would allow, since they're both gone now, I mean, Spock serving in Starfleet might make more sense now. I mean, as you see in the Mirror episode in the original series and back into Enterprise. So I don't know there's a lot of material going to pull from there. But what I see is, with those two gone, there's a huge political vacuum, which might facilitate Spock 10 years later to take control of the Empire and trying to turn it around. And then what happens, and then we see the effects in 100 years later in DS9. And
absolutely.
That's my head canon is forming around that idea, but
and I think that observing Lorca in this episode specifically, especially his sentimental dialogue to the crew of the Discovery that Saru, dismisses, but how hard must it have been for Mirror Lorca to assimilate into that crew, knowing that a Kelpian is like his second in command, right?
Yeah.
On the Discovery, and they eat Kelpians in Lorca's universe. I mean, for him to admit that he could have been being manipulative, but at that point he didn't necessarily need to be manipulative anymore. He'd already made the bargain to let the Discovery crew go. So he didn't necessarily need to say what he was saying. So I was taking him at his word that he was really respected the crew, and that the crew of Discovery is quite diverse, especially from an alien race perspective. And for him to say that he respected that crew is huge for someone who's arguing for racial purity of the Terrans. What does that mean for Lorca? I mean, and let's not dismiss the fact that Mirror Lorca, when he gets back to the Mirror Universe, is still really similar to the Lorca we've known the entire time. He doesn't change much besides from just wantonly killing people. But other than that, I mean, philosophically, he doesn't seem much different to me.
I don't know. He seems different.
I don't know.
To me, and I think because
I think if I could say, because the quote, the one that, because I write down like Heather all these quotes. What Lorca says, Terrans need a leader who will preserve our way of life, our race. And then he says, he wants to make the Empire glorious again, right? That sounds like somebody whose name I'm not going to mention. But I'm just going to say that I think that probably since we're talking about this, and I never really thought about it before until you guys started talking about it, but when Mirror Lorca got dropped into the Prime universe, I think his first natural reaction and instinct is like, everybody is beneath me. Probably had those feelings about Saru. How is this slave running this? But I think he realized, because of who he was, in the Terran, that he obviously knows manipulation and, making people do what he wants. And obviously, if he's the captain on this ship, he could just give orders. And so I think that having everybody follow his orders immediately and not seem to question kept him, his ego right up there. But also I think maybe he ended up having respect for the crew because they actually did their jobs. They did it so well. And he's like, put whatever race you are aside, I'd actually have you in my empire, because I know that, you'd get the job done. So I think he still has this same attitude and his feelings on race and whatnot. But I think that he only had that after seeing the capability of, the starship.
Yeah, and I kind of think it, how to say that, that it shows that, some people will only show their most, I don't say heinous side, kind of, again, like what we saw earlier last year, people will only show, when they show their true colors, oh God, I don't know how to say that. People will say, "Oh yeah, I have a gay friend, or I have a black friend." I don't know. He might just see it like that personally. But I don't know. Might want to cut that up. My train of thought was.
Well, no, it's
horrible.
a great thought. It's a great thought because Lorca says that if any of the Discovery crew gave him any sort of a clue that they would be willing to deviate from the Starfleet code, then he would have recruited them. What if Saru gave him that impression? Would he really have recruited a Kelpian?
But I might explain the Landry situation, though. how Landry was a hole when we met her in the Prime Universe, and she was a Prime Universe Landry.
Yeah, I almost I questioned that too. I'm like, wow, I thought maybe she had gone with him and transported with him to the Prime Universe, but she shows up in an agonizer, so obviously she was still Mirror Landry.
I would believe that at least, it's great that you mentioned that I forgot how he said that, he said that. So that opens the door that he might have taken Landry under his wing and told her the plan, and that would explain her whole demeanor.
Yeah. I would love for them to do an episode at some point, just a flashback episode showing Mirror Lorca beaming into the Prime Universe and how he got off that transporter pad and convinced them all that he was the Prime Lorca and assimilated into that crew. He's got to be completely shocked by the diversity of that crew, that ship.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he might have gotten enough lucky and have had a relatively human bridge crew.
Yeah, true, potentially, yeah.
So that might have softened the blow a bit, and then we're like, kind of like, I mean, not to the extreme of the evil. Well, I don't want to say evil, just Mirror Kirk beaming into the Enterprise, just going berserk right away. That was a little,
That's the only precedent we have, right? We see the Mirror characters locked up in the brig, and Spock is standing there watching them, screaming at him.
And to quote Spock, I mean, it's easier for a civilized person to act like a barbarian than for the barbarian to act like a civilized person. So, I mean, you got to give credits to Mirror Lorca to at least have been able to act like a civilized man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that after learning about this strange romantic thing with Mirror Burnham last week, it certainly set me up to see Lorca in a different light. And I failed to talk about some of what was disturbing, and a lot of it just came back to the diction that they chose and using words like groomed, which are tightly how do I say this, which are tightly related to pedophilia and how child predators groom the children that they abuse, and the realization that I had shortly after that I never really thought about, that is certainly something that happened to me without my knowing it. And this wasn't a situation. Well, I mean, we do know that Giorgio raised Burnham from a child, so I don't know how that all played a part, or if that was just really bad word choice on the part.
I think so, because I mean, the writers have been to many dark places, but I'm not sure they're going to go that dark.
I hope not, but I really wish they'd thought about that a little bit better before they chose to use words like that. However, even they carried that theme through in this episode as far as the love interest part, and it's not something that's overbearing or anything. He mentions pillow talk with Burnham, then when she comes to him with Giorgio, which I thought it was interesting that he fell for that so quickly. And I wondered how much of that was his passion for Burnham and his passion and lust to be emperor. The way that he was looking at her was not a look that we've seen from Lorca before, and there was a lot in that look. I mean, take it how you want to take it, but I did not feel that this episode's version of Lorca was really anything like the Discovery Captain Lorca.
No, absolutely not.
I don't feel that he really and I've really enjoyed Lorca, and I'm still sad to see Jason Isaacs go, because I like Jason Isaacs and I liked Captain Lorca up until this point. But I mean, he's just a racist, power hungry,
typical Terran.
I won't say child abusing since we don't know that for sure. But he's just, there's nothing redeeming there. If they had kept him as Mirror Lorca, in the plate, if they kept him and not Jojo or whatever, but he was written that way. There's nothing redeemable there for me. If he had any inkling of Discovery Lorca, which it's not Prime Lorca, so I'm just calling him Discovery Lorca. Any inkling of that, then I could perhaps find some empathy there. But I just found this guy really gross and creepy, and I don't really get the whole love interest with Burnham because it wasn't played up. Like, it didn't really play much of a part. I think he's
well,
so
it played in a way that he took Burnham away from the Emperor. I mean, that's the whole point of their relationship. I mean, that was pretty much it from my point of view.
I felt like, he could have just kidnapped her or just taken her away and used her as a pawn.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, that's really what it was, is that Burnham was Giorgio's daughter. So why there needed to be any kind of love interest element, I don't think that played out well. And I don't think that was quite thought through in line with some other story, like the PTSD and the the rape, sexual assault. Like, let's kind of mention this, but then not really do anything with it. So that's really my only criticism there. But just since we're talking about Lorca, I mean, I'm glad that this version of Lorca is dead because I really did not like him after this episode. But I'm trying to think. I think we've kind of talked about most of my points as far as what we learned new, because there was definitely Stamets's cloak and the emergency transport thing that Giorgio had, the force field that they used, and the flash grenades,
and the gas also they used.
So the bioweapon, which I just found really creepy because it was a gas chamber. Like, that's what it looked like to me.
Oh, that's 1 through 15. They said 1 through 17 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
yeah. I mean, it's whatever it was. It was like a gas, and it was gassing them, and it just kind of made me feel gross. But I think trying to find any last bits here. So it's not something that we necessarily learned new, but it was something I noticed that got brought up in After Trek. When they get back to their time and the spores are dispersing, there's a tiny green spore that lands on his shoulder.
Right.
And I was like, what's up with that? Because that's very specific. That's a specific shot. And I saw it and I was like, And then I kind of forgot about it. And then it got brought up on After Trek. And apparently we may see some more come from that tiny scene. So whatever that means, we don't know all that we will, which I think is pretty interesting. But lots of new technology in this episode. We learned that Giorgio has some really awesome fight skills and can do some high kicks, which we know because it's Giorgio. But it was really, really great. Really great fight scenes. Gosh, there was just so much good stuff in this episode. There was. Trying to think if there's anything else that we saw that we hadn't.
Are Terrans resistant to knives in the back? Or
that knife went real deep. Just saying.
I mean, speaking from an evolutionary standpoint, know,
it could have pierced a lung.
It's not a what we learned that was new, but it does fit in with just what we learned or learning in general. I really appreciated the amount of sciencing in this episode.
Yep.
Because it really, it just falls into this episode having it all. Like, I know that sometimes people think that going back and explaining all this is too much. Like, you should have picked that up already or whatever. But not everybody gets the science, especially since this is a type of drive we've never heard of before. And sometimes it can be difficult to follow and understand what's going on. So I really appreciated that they flat out explained pretty much everything to us.
I didn't really get all that until my second watch either. I had to listen to it all over again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about how the Charon works, and they're mycelial network, and we know how Discovery was going to science about to destroy it, and then to get home. So I thought that was really nice because we've gotten some sciencing here and there, and it was really great to get a lot of it here, with Stamets, but with Tilly. I love seeing her, share this knowledge. And there was actually a really great moment where Stamets thanked her and thanked her for being an inspiration, which was like super awesome.
And one thing we do learn is like, because people have been talking about how come we never heard of the spore drive before, in the future of Star Trek, and people will say, oh well, the mycelial network, probably just disappeared or destroyed, but we learned that it can't be destroyed, otherwise, all life is gone. So I'm curious to see how they're going to wrap this up, since we know now that you just can't destroy it. So I wonder how they're going to close that breach, or if they will close that.
It's going to have to be healed, the network.
Yeah.
Like they're going to have to heal it somehow now that it's been damaged.
Might take a few thousand years.
But I think they're also going to be preoccupied with this war, or what's left of the war. So, all right. Well, I think we've covered just about everything we can cover there. So let's move into Spin It Again and look back. Let's move into Spin It Again, our look back at standout moments, characters, scenes, anything you feel is worth a little extra attention. So, Polly, what really stuck out to you in this episode that you think deserves a shout out?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have? I still have so many notes. So I've been a fan of Michelle Yeoh since like 93 when I saw her in Heroic Trio and Police Story 3. And so to see like the good old Michelle Yeoh kicking butt was amazing. I was like, this is the best thing ever. And the fact that it was the two of them fighting as a team was amazing. I loved, basically, if I'm gonna, I'll come back to another part later, because this was a really important episode for women and like female roles. I'll come back to that, but another huge thing was Saru finding his voice as captain, because he's always seemed to be, questioning himself. And like when he was recording his acting captain's log, he sounded a lot more sure of himself. And then when it came to the point, I'm trying not to like get excited and cry at the same time, because this was so cool. When he said, he was on the view screen and he said, where's Burnham? To Lorca, and then she said, I'm where I need to be, Saru. I'm in my place. And I'm like, oh my, please let that be code. Please let that be code. And of course it was, because all hell breaks loose. And then Saru just yelling, fire! Fire! Oh my God. All the hairs on my arms stood up. It was just one of I think the best moments of the season so far, just seeing how Saru has come into his own throughout these whole 13 episodes. Agreed. Was incredible. Even when Burnham first connects and she gets a hold of Discovery, when she's hiding in the hallway, or was that a Jeffries tube? I'm not sure. And he says, he greets her as like, hello, friend, which was so lovely. But it's just seeing him really come into his own, because he's obviously, the Admiral obviously isn't on the ship. So it just seems natural that Saru is going to just be promoted to the captain position, I guess, in my opinion. So anywho, that is really good. I also liked how when right before Lorca, bites the big one, it's basically before. So I'm like so rambling. I'm just so excited to get the words out. He goes to the throne and he picks up Georgiou's sword and he says, "Nothing that happened to me was an accident." And I'm like, oh, I hope this is foreshadowing. I never see anything coming, but he's basically holding the sword that's gonna stab him in the back. From
I didn't realize that.
So when that finally happens, and then, he goes and she opens the lovely trap door, and then he goes through, I kind of had this lovely feeling of watching him disintegrate like Voldemort in Harry Potter. I thought that was really cool. Those were like huge, like standout moments. Obviously Saru's speech that we've already talked about. But I think the main thing was also this was a really strong episode for the female characters, which I thought was really important. I once again not going to mention a certain person's name, but the fact that this episode happened like pretty much exactly a year after a certain huge march that took place, not just in Washington, but like all over the world. Women are like finally speaking up. I found that, we finally got to hear Arium speaking because, Stamets says, oh, it was actually Arium flagged this. And she's the one who helps Stamets explain about the super micellar reactor. There we go. And then just seeing, because we already knew about, Burnham and Georgiou and how they were like starting to bond in this universe. But there still was this huge bond. It was a moment that Burnham actually said to Georgiou, which she said, both versions of me betrayed both versions of you. I'm not going to let that happen again. And then in referring to Lorca a bit later on in that speech, she says, for what he's done to me and to anyone else who stood in his way. And right now, I don't want to get political or anything, but I thought that was like for where the Me Too movement is right now. I thought that was an incredibly important moment for me to hear as both a woman and also as a non-American. I'm sorry to say that, but I just think it was incredibly important for words like that to be said and for the characters in the show to have basically the power that they did in this episode, like scattered all throughout, not just like in the kicking butt of that scene, but finding and showing the strength of all these female characters. I thought that Ted Sullivan did just a magnificent job in putting this all together in what I hope is referred back to as a really pivotal episode in Star Trek in general.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Did I even breathe during that?
No, you didn't. I'm impressed.
I'm going to take a sip of my tea. Discuss.
Yes, do that. Did anybody have comments to say to follow that up?
I do. I just going to throw one thing out. Sorry, JP. I just want to throw. Can we just? I know Polly didn't specifically call this moment out, but I want to throw this back. Can we just revel in the moment where Georgiou roundhouse kicks a flying knife out of the air?
Yes.
How badass was that? I had to stop and rewind and like, did she just really kick Lorca's knife out of the air? And with no flinching at all, just kicks it and then just starts going. Like, it's amazing. Beautiful choreography.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just incredible.
I mean,
sorry, JP, go ahead.
I mean, I feel like polyester just pulled the rug out of me. I mean,
sorry.
I mean, the bad, that scene where they compare badges, it's very evocative, of what they both lost. And again, it's the and you see like, you were destined to betray me in every universe. And then you see Sonequa just go like, no, not this time. And that's when, I think that's where the character decides that, no, this time I will not allow her to die. Pretty sure it's like you can pinpoint a moment of that decision, like at that specific moment. Mm-hmm. One thing, I mean, it's very nitpicky, but I'm glad to have traditional non-hologram communications. Mm-hmm. I don't know for you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I liked it, but at the same time, I felt, I don't want to be a whine or something, but there's something about traditional main view screen communications. I mean, it's really nitpicky, but I'm that kind of guy. the whole Discovery Bridge crew. I mean, everyone had a line in there, which I'm really glad they did. And Ted Sullivan did mention that they would have a more critical role, and I'm glad that they did, and I hope that they will keep getting more. Now that Lorca's not there to sideline everyone, I want to see more of that bridge crew, and I'm glad that they all had a part to play in the action and in the decision making and the planning, and it was great. You know, I know everyone was waiting for Ariam to do something, you know, constructive, and we got a glimpse. I mean, it's not a lot, but you know, we got something. I think the writer, I hope and I believe that the writers got the message, and I believe that we'll get more of them in season 2. Because you know, not a lot of time to turn around in 2 weeks from now for probably 2 episodes. But yeah, I mean, Polly pretty much said everything. Everything that stood out for me. Michelle Yeoh in full, as I say, you know, in full crouching tiger, hidden dragon mode. Sorry, that's that one in the James Bond movie. That's the 2 reference I have of Michelle Yeoh. I need to cultivate my Hong Kong culture, but
yes,
eventually.
Such amazing stuff.
But yeah, I mean that's pretty much great moments between Burnham and Giorgio, and yeah. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Well, Jeff, what about you?
Oh, I have a few things. One thing that really stood out to me early on in the episode is Lorca has followers who were in agonizer booths for 212 days.
Yeah. No, it's a year. It was a year in 212 days.
That's crazy,
yes.
Right? I wondered, like, how long can someone stand to be in one of those things? I mean, they got to take them out and feed them and let them go to the bathroom. But, I mean, good Lord, that's a long friggin' time. And all of them seem to be able to crawl out and immediately get up and do their thing. So,
well, that's Star Trek for you, frankly. I mean, Star Trek has a 51-year history of mentally abusing people and traumatizing people, and then they never deal with it, except maybe Picard mentions it a couple of times. So,
I mean,
that's
look at Captain Kirk and Dagger of the Mind. I mean, that's a really early example of that.
Well, I mean, they showed it pretty well in DS9, where Worf and Bashir got the Jemadar prison camp. But then again, you know, they showed the suffering during the internment camp. But after that, it was, you know, fine and dandy. Worf almost, you know, fought the Jemadar to death in a ring match. But you know, next day, a little bit of bone knitting, and here you go.
Yeah.
I mean, the torture chamber folks didn't have a bone knitting thing. They just got out and picked up guns. So what? You know, my question is, why didn't they just kill him? I mean, we've seen them space people for way less.
True.
Yeah.
True indeed.
I mean, I understand maybe wanting the captain to do a whole Han Solo thing where you can have, I don't know, you want Jason Isaacs in your throne room suffering while you're doing matters of state.
Yeah, there you go. A little agonizer booth off in the corner.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's way more entertaining than a block of carbonite.
True.
Yeah.
But I love that segue, by the way. Thanks for the Star Wars segue. I'm going to throw it out there, and this, you guys toast me for this, but did anybody have a Death Star flashback with this? I mean, Obi-Wan has got to disable the shields so they can shoot the thing in the middle. I mean,
and open your ears when Lorca falls into the pit. You hear a TIE fighter. You hear the TIE fighter. You can hear the roar of the. You hear the distinctive roar of a TIE fighter going by. So
total Star Wars nod there. So I kind of had a little bit of a flashback to not only A New Hope, but also kind of Return of the Jedi in a way.
In a way that it should have been with way more kung fu.
For sure. But I mean, the phaser fire, we said a lot of phaser fire in this episode, which I thought was amazing. And I love the effect of people being vaporized.
Oh yeah, there's a
So
lot of
cool.
vaporizing today.
Yeah, tons of it. Tons of it.
I mean, they don't want to, deal with the whole lot of corpses. So
yeah, why buy just a little ash on the floor? You got to sweep it up.
So then again, you see everyone killing each other, but then a few weeks earlier they were all okay with just keeping them in agonizer booths and keeping them alive. So
yeah, what's the decision point as to who gets killed and who gets put in the agonizer in the mirror universe?
Yeah, I mean, you have bad thoughts about the Emperor. We spaced you. You tried to usurp the throne. We'll keep you in a corner for 2 years
and then space you.
But it was also, I think, really interesting in the middle of the fight. Like Burnham is she's like knocking people off, but she's pretty much just doing self-defense, whereas Georgie was just like killing.
Yeah,
because that's like her universe is kill, and is more self-defense for Burnham. I think I tried to watch it a second time, and I don't know if she killed anybody, but it was mostly self-defense for Burnham.
That brings me to a point that's something a moment that stood out for me, where Burnham says, "You could have asked."
It was great.
Yeah,
great moment. Yeah,
it echoes a little bit of what Saru said when they took Tyler back on board 2 episodes ago. They're Starfleet. They're not gonna kill you. I mean, you just say, "Well, I'm from a different universe. Don't seem to be a right place. I need help." You could have asked. I mean, it's a life lesson right there.
Yep. Oh, that was a question on so many Star Trek episodes in the past. If the hostile alien just came out and said, "Hey, listen, this is what I need," Starfleet would have helped them out. But instead, they have all sorts of nefarious plans, and they're tricking people and killing people. And it was a simple question. Okay, can you guys help me get back to my planet?
Why breaking to your neighbors because you need a cup of sugar?
Knock on the door.
Yeah, but if there's one thing that we know, it's that men hate asking for directions.
Unless they're asking their phone.
Yeah.
That's a new thing. It wasn't available back then.
Siri, how do I get the spore drive?
Yeah, really.
How do I get back to my universe?
Oh, man. A couple more quick things. Oh, sorry, Heather.
No, I was just going to ask you.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say just a great episode for TOS throwback sound effects.
Oh.
Lots of them littered in there.
Yes.
Loved it. So I'm not going to call every single one out. And my final point, this was probably my biggest laugh out loud moment, because we've talked about this on DiscoTrek so many times in the past. I love that Saru literally called himself out on his threat ganglia not working. We're like, why didn't his ganglia pop out for that moment? Yeah. People were going to die. Why didn't his ganglia pop out? And he's like, I didn't detect anything strange. You would think I would. Like, okay, so they're not 100%. They don't always work.
Well, not that. I think it was just because Lorca was not a threat to the Discovery and to the lives of the crew. I think there's that. He didn't want to actively kill Saru or the crew or the ship. He just wanted to use them. So...
Yeah, but then why did they come up when Burnham came back on the ship?
Yeah, exactly.
In the first, third or fourth episode?
Because he doesn't like her and he's nervous and he's judgmental.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about these ganglia. I don't know how reliable
they are. Not 100%, Heather.
But that loops us back into one of Polly's opening remarks about the humor in this episode, because that was a part that I had written down, and then right before the Charon is blown up, Landry's like, "What are they going to do?" And she's like, "Is the containment field up?"
Yes.
And the way that she even asked that was just quite hilarious. It was comical, the tone of her voice. So I thought that was pretty funny. And speaking of Landry, since we didn't really mention her, and we did make a point to talk about how great this episode was for the women characters, I think it's worthwhile to welcome Landry back. Unfortunately, she's gone again. But it was nice to see Rekha Sharma again. And I thought that it was quite curious that Mirror Landry is much more likable than her universe counterpart. and she even smiles. So I thought that was so interesting because I really would like to have seen more of this Landry. She seemed smart, and I really liked her a lot. She was on After Trek, and pretty funny on there too.
Fellow Canadian, so
yeah,
she's got that going for her.
I did not know that, but I did. There was one thing that I totally forgot to mention, and it's not quite a spin it again type thing, but when Stamets is coming back through the mycelial network, ding ding, 50 more points for Gryffindor. He says it's the clearing in the forest. And previously, when he was first in the drive, and I don't know that he was yet in the coma, but he said it's the clearing in the forest. Yes. That's how they get through. So I'm trying to figure out where and how Stamets saw them eventually get through, or who he saw get through, because that's how Discovery got through. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Like he referenced that's how they get through.
The clearing, yeah.
And so was there some, not quite time travel, but like, did he see them somehow? I thought it was really interesting because like we explicitly heard that. I think it was when he was first in the coma.
Yeah. Well, he was traveling to the mirror universe. I think it was when he was in the reaction cube, if I remember correctly.
I can't remember if he was when he was in it, or if that's what he said when he when he came right out of it, and that's when we first saw him and his eyes were all glassy in the mid-season.
Right, because I'm trying to. I kind of thought about that as well, and I didn't write it down. But remember, because he said he called Tilly Captain.
Yep.
And then when he's talking to the other Stamets, in the system, he's like, oh, so that's how I called her Captain and blah, blah. And then I was trying to remember that exact same thing, if the whole forest thing was before that or around the same time.
It's like we know that somewhere he saw how it got used, but like he specifically said that's how they get through. And at the time, I thought it was the Pavins he was talking about or something. And now I'm just really curious who he was talking about specifically. Maybe I will ask Anthony Rapp on Twitter. But I think I've kind of like said my love story to this episode already. So I can only go over it so many times because this really came down to excellent writing by Ted Sullivan, excellent direction by Olatunde Osunsanmi, which I didn't say right. Olatunde Osunsanmi. I hope that's right. It's very important to me that I pronounce names and words correctly if y'all haven't figured that out yet. Because these actors deserve that for sure. It was, again, great to see the bridge crew come together. And, I get that it lended itself to an incredibly powerful moment in this episode. I still would have liked to have seen more of them throughout, the first 12 episodes. I don't think that seeing more of them would have taken away from this moment at all. But it was great to finally see each of them get lines in the same episode, alongside Saru, Mr. Acting Captain, coming into that captain role, which I also was never quite expecting, I guess. Saru, I adore Doug Jones and I adore this character, but it's taken some time to really understand how I feel about him. Like I really like him, and then I'm not quite sure. I think this was a wonderful moment for Saru, and I think he's won the hearts of many of us, especially after this. And just Yeah, this was just written well, visually stunning, acted extremely well. It had surprises. It had so much new stuff, new technology. Um, like everyone except for Voke and Morel, like everyone, excuse me, everyone got a little bit of the spotlight. And then, as we already mentioned, um, aside from Saru's speech, we had some great proof of Star Trek. Not that Discovery needs it, because we all know that Discovery is Star Trek, but back to that point when Burnham said to Lorca, we would have helped you. We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is. That's who I am. That's why I won't kill you now. And that is who Starfleet is, and that is who Burnham is. And I've been saying the entire series, like, if you need to find some Star Trek, look to Burnham, because that's where I felt the core of Star Trek ideology and philosophy was in the beginning. But the writers, all of the writers, have done a great job of incorporating the entire cast into that Star Trek philosophy and ideology. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I say that every week, guys. I'm excited to see where it goes. I think I said after this episode last night on Twitter something like it was a beautiful ballet of writing and direction and acting. And I threw out that whole, if you don't think this is Star Trek, you're wrong. And I feel like when I say things like that, I have to clarify that I'm not saying that anyone's opinion of whether this is good or not is wrong. But I mean, number one, it's just a fact that this is Star Trek owned by, CBS. So what's happening now is Star Trek, whether you like it or not. No one's saying that you have to like Discovery or love Discovery. It's definitely difficult for me to see how anyone doesn't enjoy this show. And it doesn't have to be every episode. There are certainly episodes, as we know, that I haven't liked or I've had large issues with, and there are parts of the writing that I really struggle with. But overall, it's still Star Trek, and I really just wish that, like, people who gave up on the series early on would maybe come back to it. But to come
they
back,
will.
I hope so. But like, I've seen that the thing is, I've seen people who come back to it, but they're still looking at it from a very critical, negative perspective.
Yeah.
And if that's how you're going to look at something, whether it's Star Trek or anything else in the world, that's the only way that you're going to see it. Like, and that's part of Star Trek philosophy here, is that we have to learn how to be objective and to look at issues from varied perspectives. And so I just really hope that in time, people are able to come back to it or to start watching it and to not watch it from an overly critical perspective and just see what's there. And even if you don't quite, if it's not your version of Star Trek or you don't see the Star Trek in it, try to find something that you do like about it, because it's still a really great show. And I did a poll a while back on Twitter and asked people, like, if this wasn't Star Trek, would you be watching? Is it? It was not. I should have added more to the question, but there were lots of responses like, well, no, because it's behind a paywall, which I totally understand. But
I'm not here.
Yeah, it's like I was trying to ask, like, is this show still enjoyable? Like, without it being Star Trek, like, if this was accessible to you, if it was on TV, would you still be watching it? And I was happy that most people said yes. I think it's just incredibly well done. And while I would certainly love for it to be accessible to everyone, without the paywall. On the other hand, I'm glad that we have the production quality that we do, because I don't think it would be what it is without that.
Yeah. And if only people would understand the realities of producing a show in 2018, maybe they'd be a little more grateful to have Star Trek today, because the days of having 26 episodes in a season are gone.
Mm-hmm.
The days of having single episodes not related to a larger arc are gone. I mean, some folks have a very narrow definition of what Star Trek is, and some of these parameters are set by the production standards, which are changing today. And Star Trek is a costly show to make, and I don't want to have one episode a year that will be Shades of Grey or Clip Show, because they run out of budget. So I'm glad to have fewer episodes, higher quality, and hopefully, now that they have better feedback through social media and they engage with fans, I'm pretty sure that season 2 will be pretty damn near perfect.
Yeah, I mean, sky's the limit. I don't know what they're going to do with it. And, even myself, like, talking about issues like character deaths. I've done a lot of that in the past several weeks, and helping to explain why character deaths are impactful, because a lot of people don't understand, and that's no fault of theirs. It's just that when you're not a queer person, you're just not really exposed to that perspective of life, those life experiences. So it's been great to have this dialogue across social media and various podcasts to help educate others about all of these issues, because Star Trek has brought them up, whether they meant to, whether it was intentional, etc. And look, I'm losing my train of thought. So
you know what, Heather?
Yeah.
I'll throw one more thing out. I had a final point that I was waiting for the end of the show to throw out there, because I was surprised that this hasn't come up yet. As we've talked about earlier on the show, this was a huge episode for women, but it's also another huge episode for Star Trek from a diversity perspective, is a non-human in command of a Starfleet ship.
Yep.
I mean, that's another really big nod to diversity in Star Trek, that, you'd have a guy like Saru in doing a great job in command of a starship. So Star Trek, bridging even barriers that we haven't even come up against yet.
Yeah, because if you look in the other shows, you had Data, Worf, Kira, Jadzia, and that's
Spock.
Pretty much Spock, and T'Pol a little bit.
T'Pol a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you had Neelix on Voyager.
He became captain?
No, he was a cuck. Just as important. No.
Yeah, just as important. And Arex on the animated series, I got to throw that out there.
Oh, you had the doctor, the emergency. Yeah, so he and then he became
EMH.
like the acting captain. Yeah.
Yeah.
ECH.
So I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at the bridge crew, I mean, they're an incredibly diverse group of people as well. But
extremely.
What I was trying to say, and now I'm going to shoot myself. Sorry, I had it, and then you started talking about that, and then I thought of it again, and then I came back to this. Okay, so when we're talking about making TV in 2018, and we're talking about some of these issues, like the barrier gauge trope and death of minority characters and stuff like that. Even then, I am aware that there are more people involved than even the writers. And so we have known from all of the notes in the Roddenberry files and all the books that have been written, we've seen the notes coming down from the network. We know that they play a hand in some of the things that we see and we don't see. And I mean, this is a different time than 51 years ago, but I think it's important to still realize that there's still an overlord of sorts. So when you're looking at, what we end up with at the end of day, I mean, this could have started out, Discovery could have started out as, okay, we want to do another 24 episode first season of this, and it's going to be just like TNG with these character stories, not serialized. But no, I mean, we have to make TV a certain way now to fit in with what's out there. And it could have been the writers that said, oh, we definitely want to make this Game of Thrones style. Or it could have been the network that said, we want to make this Game of Thrones style.
From what I understood, they asked Brian Fuller what he wanted to do, and they went with the idea he wanted to do, like for the first season, because at first he wanted to do that anthology series, which would have been cost prohibitive, but he kind of stuck with the idea of Discovery. From what I understand anyway, from what I read, and I mean, in this early, we're not sure how reliable the information is, but from what I gathered is like they asked him what he wanted to do, and they said, okay, but it won't be an anthology series. I think that was the only big caveat that they thrown at him before he was removed.
But again, like there's still participation from
absolutely
more than just the writers, and we don't necessarily know what that is. Just as we don't know the specifics of why Brian Fuller was reportedly fired. I mean, that's what people have said at this point. We don't know.
We all have our theories on it.
Yeah, like we don't know the specifics, and maybe we'll know someday, but we're not going to know right now. And I think that just being aware of that broader spectrum of who is involved in making a television series can lend some perspective when some of these issues come up, because there's a discussion of like, why is this Culber thing a big deal? Because you've got a gay producer and two gay actors that are all totally okay with it. And they're saying this is not a trope. It's not the barrier gaze trope. So in that sense, like, why shouldn't we listen to them? And like, there's dialogue to be had. And again, at the end of the day, like we very well may see Culber come back in some kind of physical form where he's there as a man and not a figment of our imagination. And I will cry for days. Will it completely redeem the story? No, not necessarily. But it will help me feel a lot better about it. However, like, I don't think that this was anything, anyone involved in Star Trek did to intentionally hurt anyone.
Yeah. If I can jump in, I mean, I feel like they felt like they needed some, you got Stamets in a coma and in this other world, and I think they just might have, they found I would say an easy way to find him a guide. They could have done it a different way. I agree. I think they just,
Well, and I don't want to I don't want to have every show talk about this, because I'm sure there are people out there that are tired of hearing me talk about it. I'm just saying that I think at the end of the day, in the spirit of Star Trek, it's important for everyone, whether you love Star Trek and you have no problems with it, whether you like it, you have issues with it, whether you haven't watched it, just try to see from other perspectives sometimes. And when you do that, as we've said all along with Star Trek, Star Trek certainly, it's for us as viewers. They want us to watch it, and Discovery has done a great job of reaching out to fans and showing the fans that they understand Star Trek. I think they've done a good job of throwing in Easter eggs in every episode, and providing some level of fan service without it being too much fan service. They have created a version of Star Trek that is unlike any Star Trek we've ever seen.
Agreed.
It is unique and special and very different. And when things are very different, it is sometimes difficult to accept or like those things. But again, like Star Trek teaches us to at least try to see from that perspective. And I just really hope that people can tune into that and maybe revisit it once the season is over and look at it that way, because despite my qualms, I really love what they've done. And this episode has me feeling a lot better than I have in previous episodes about where they're going. And I mean, I've been talking about my experience in watching it now with someone who's, not immersed in fan culture and all the theories. And so like I'm sitting on the edge of my seat and he's sitting on the edge of his seat, and we're like grabbing each other, like, we don't know what's going to happen. What's going to happen now? Like, what's going on? And it's phenomenal. And there is no other show on TV right now besides maybe Game of Thrones that really gets me to that kind of level where I'm just like on my seat with anticipation, like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
And I gotta say, it's kind of the same for me with me and my boyfriend. I mean, he's a big Warhammer 40,000 fan, so he's deep in the lore. He loves things that are heavy in lore. So he's very well fed with Star Trek, because now, I started feeding him Discovery. Now he's watching Deep Space Nine, and he's getting lost on Memory Alpha now. So because
that's what they want. They want this to do, is they want to reach new fans. And the same thing with the Kelvin Timeline movies. Like, they're different because they're movies also, and they're meant to be summer blockbusters made for, today's audience. And now this is TV, and I'm much happier having Star Trek on TV in this way and having a whole new set of characters aside from Sarek. Who I love, but I love that it's not a rehash. Despite being a prequel, it's not a rehash of anything that we've seen. And despite the fact that last week we were talking about how predictable it's been, this episode blew that predictability out of the water. And and I mean, it wasn't just Lorca died. There was so much more on top of it, just being such a beautifully produced piece of art. So it's, when you talk about shout outs and who deserves special attention, every single person involved in Star Trek Discovery deserves that shout out this week.
I mean, I gotta give a shout out to Jason Isaacs on Twitter for giving the whole "I'm dead, stone dead" the whole parrot sketch for fans of Monty Python.
Nice.
Because I'm not well versed enough in my Python to recite it by heart, but when someone I think it was Matt Myers said, like, "Is anybody really dead on Star Trek?" And then he just like replied saying like, "Yeah, I'm dead," and then he played on the parrot sketch. Very, very British of him. So I gotta throw him a bone for that.
Well, I will only accept Prime version of Lorca. I mean, that's all they can really. Well, like, I don't know, but to be determined. My understanding is that the Lorca is gone, but we will see Jason Isaacs in 180 3 days.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm saving my pennies now to take a picture and to thank him for his contribution to Star Trek. So we are at the 2-hour mark, which, hey, we didn't make it to the 3-hour mark, thank goodness. But so I guess I kind of feel like we've said everything that we can say at this point.
Yeah. I mean, we could have just read the whole script.
We
could have done a table read
acted.
and been done in half the time. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
We could have done it twice.
We could have watched it 3 times. And which I did, and I was so excited. I spent my whole day thinking I'm going to go home and watch this episode twice. So I think we can all agree this was a truly phenomenal episode of Star Trek. Next week, oh, I'm so sad that we're getting down to the final episodes.
I know too.
Oh, man. But next week we have episode 14, The War Without, The War Within. And it looks like we're going to see L'Rell again, and Sarek, and Admiral Cornwell.
Yeah.
I love her. Oh my
Pretty
god.
awesome.
For fans of the mobile game Star Trek Timelines, they just brought they're gonna bring Admiral Cornwell into the game this week, so I'm really excited for that.
Cool.
Fun. So I assume that next week we'll be back here with 2 new guests talking about how great that episode was and the best episode we've seen so far. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and tell people how to find us on social media if they want to continue the conversation. So Polly, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's a few ways. On Twitter, I'm at Polyester Gems. Don't forget the H. Also on Facebook, I'm obviously a member of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention page. I belong to about I think it's between 10 and 15 other Facebook pages. You will see me somewhere on there. Also on Facebook, I have a public figure page. It is Polyester, but I think if you do at Dammit Jim Polyester, you'll be able to find me. If I can do a plug, I'm actually going to be going to the Orlando Fringe Festival in May, from May 15th to the 28th, and I'm going to be performing my one-woman show, Damn It, Jim, I'm a Comedian, Not a Doctor. So I'll be there. So if anybody lives in Orlando or is traveling to Orlando, I'd love to see you at the show. And then if it's also okay if I do one more thing, we didn't mention it, but I went to the Las Vegas convention in 2015 and 2016, and I actually you might recognize me from some of the pages on Facebook. I'm the gal who commented about having an AA meeting in my room and that anybody could contact me. So I'm not at the convention, but I still have the Gmail address up. If anybody ever feels like sending me a message just to talk about anything, anytime, and that is friends of Bill W. and Grace W. at gmail.com. So you can find me in several different ways, but please feel free to send me a private message anytime if you feel like doing so.
And we are certainly open to helping out with making that event happen again this year.
We talked about that on the shore leave last year, didn't we?
Yeah,
I remember that. It was so lovely of you guys.
Yep. We do everything we can to help facilitate people, and shore leave, STLV, there's a certain kind of nightlife there that's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. And we always try to emphasize that just because a lot of the social interaction takes place at bars, there's no expectation that anyone has a drink in their hand. However, we also understand that it may not be a comfortable place for some people to be. So we do everything we can to help facilitate get-togethers like you have. and anything else that's out there. So yeah, please let us know what we can do to help for this year, because I know plenty of people have taken advantage of that camaraderie, and we love to facilitate building families within our family. So JP, what about you? How can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at ParlonsTrek. That's ParlonsTrek. Facebook, I have a page for my podcast, Parlons Trek. So if you speak French, or if you somehow understand French and want to hear a bunch of guys talking about Star Trek to keep your ear felicitated in French, I mean, it's a good way to to keep that going. And of course on the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group at JP Cardin. That's my personal Facebook. Same here. You can drop me a line if somehow you want to get together. I'm a very social person. I love to meet people, and I as you know, we never met, Heather and I already feel like we're really excited. I'm really psyched about meeting you guys over there. So Parlons Trek, that's my thing. I broadcast live every Thursday. Yeah, every Thursday at 8:30 Eastern. And we do have a one fun thing about our show is we have a license to play music. So I usually
nice.
Thanks to the Canadian authorities and my broadcasters, so we can play like Warp 11 and 5-Year Mission, and
Nice.
So that's one aspect of the Trek fandom that I really love, is the musical side. And I gotta say, I started, of course, with Warp 11, and I discovered so many wonderful talents. My friend Ian interviewed for my show the Roddenberries earlier at SDLV last year.
Yep.
So I'm really happy that I'm gonna get to meet them this year. So so that's my thing. So yep.
Very cool. Jeff, I hear you're somewhere on the internet.
Really? No, I'm just kidding.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm sorry. Sorry. I was muted. I was trying to be respectful. So yeah, I am somewhere on the internet. That's right, Heather. You can find me on the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. I am Jeff Hewlett, and as Heather pointed out on the Patreon earlier, rarely am I on Twitter at Warp Factor Jeff, but if you mention me, I will certainly get back to you.
Well, that is good to know. So I, of course, am in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas Facebook group, along with Jeff and our great friend Jessie Akendo. So come find us there. I'm tired, I guess. Once you click the button to join, it'll ask you some questions. So let us know that you found the group via the podcast, because that's super helpful. But on Twitter, I am LLA Posper, and I have been told to make sure to spell that out because it's LLAPAWSPER, like a dog paw. And the show is Disco_Trek. The network is at Tricorder Show. And then we are the tricordertransmissions.com, and that has links to everything, and it will eventually have links to everyone on the podcast. It takes a while to get that updated, but that will be there. So thank you, everyone, for coming. We've had a great time. It's every show that we do, it feels like family. So welcome to the family officially. And,
thank you very much.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you this year or next year, whichever one everyone winds up making it to. And in the meantime, we will be back next week to talk more Star Trek Discovery. Until then, live long and prosper.